We're just over a week away from UFC 226, by far the most stacked event of the year so far. We have two championship fights, Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega, and light heavyweight champ Daniel Cormier versus heavyweight champ Stipe Miocic. Some amazing fights here. If you have any friends who are casuals or they don't really watch the UFC and you want to get them into the sport, I highly recommend having them over to watch this one, because from top to bottom, from the Fight Pass prelims to the main card, I think there's going to be some fights that are absolute bangers, and I'm very excited for this. We should pray to the MMA gods that everything comes to fruition flawlessly. UFC 223 was supposed to be amazing, and it obviously got messed up with dollies being thrown in bus windows and all that. UFC 225 was supposed to be great, but it kind of had its pizzazz taken away when Yoel Romero didn't make weight. And that card didn't really do that many pay-per-view buys either. But this one, third time's the charm. This card will probably be one of the best, if not the best, event of the year. And since it's so stacked from top to bottom, I've decided to predict the entire thing instead of just the main card. So you'll be getting my input on the Fight Pass prelims, the FS1 prelims, and the main card. Before I get into these predictions, I just want to quickly say you guys really should follow me on Twitter. I just made an account, and I think it would be a really good way for you guys to give me feedback and me to give you guys channel updates and maybe discuss new video ideas. So yeah, make sure you follow me on Twitter. I would greatly appreciate that. And without any further ado, let's get into these UFC 226 predictions. For the first fight on the Fight Pass prelims, we have two Ultimate Fighter vets, Jamie Moyle versus Emily Whitmire. Emily was on the female flyweight season, and Jamie was on the female strawweight season. So in this matchup, we have Emily moving down to strawweight. I'd say these girls have a fairly similar fighting style. They're both decision fighters for the most part, but they also pose a threat with the submissions. I have to give Jamie Moyle the slight edge, though, just because it seems like she's fought better competition throughout her career, and she's never been finished. So I doubt that Emily will be able to lock up a submission. I'd actually think it's a lot more likely for Jamie to get a submission, but I do think Jamie is going to win this fight. So my prediction is Jamie Moyle by decision. Next up on Fight Pass, we already have some Fight of the Night material. We have groovy Lando Vannata versus Drakkar Klose. I don't know what it is about Lando, but for some reason it seems like in the couple years he's been in the UFC, he's aged to like 10 years. So I don't know what's going on. He came in the UFC, he was undefeated. He fought Tony Ferguson on short notice and almost TKO'd Tony Ferguson. It was crazy. And then in his next fight, he had that knockout of the year against John McDessie. So it looked like the dude was destined for stardom. But then in the David Tamer fight, he was the huge favorite. And in the first round, it looked like he was winning. I mean, he was piecing up David. But then he gassed out and got beaten in a decision. And I was like, okay, I mean, you lost to David Tamer. Nothing wrong with that. But then in his next fight with Bobby Green, the same thing happened. He was winning at first. He hurt Bobby Green, knocked him down. But then he just started to gas out. And in the second and third round, he was getting tagged way too easy. The same thing that happened in the Tamer fight. So with Lando, I mean, he's got some gas tank problems. That's his main downfall. I don't really think he can stay in a fight for long, especially since he has such a large output of strikes. And versus Drakkar Klose, I don't really think that's going to be different. Drakkar paces himself extremely well. He fought David Tamer and lost too, but I would say it was a closer fight by the end of it. And Drakkar also beat Mark DeCasey. He took Mark DeCasey's undefeated 0 away from him. So Drakkar is definitely able to handle dudes with big power. I think this fight's going to go like Lando's going to come out like he usually does, try to land some big shots, some flashy kicks, and it's probably going to be very competitive for the first round or so, maybe first 2 rounds. But I do not trust Lando's gas tank. As much as I want the guy to be great, I don't think his gas tank's reliable at all. So I think in the second, into the third, Drakkar is going to be able to just piece him up and rack up points on the judges' scorecard. Drakkar also has really good leg kicks, and I think he's going to be able to use those to stop Lando's movement in the first round because Lando has really good movement. So in this fight, I have to say I think Drakkar Klose is going to win by decision. I think it will be a close fight, no pun intended, but I do have Drakkar by decision. Next up for the Fight Pass headliner, we have Dan Hooker versus Gilbert Burns. This is a fight between two rising lightweight prospects who are trying to make a name for themselves. Even though Dan Hooker does pose the threat of landing a vicious knee like he did to Jim Miller and Ross Pearson, I think Gilbert Burns has him beat in the striking and in the grappling. Not to mention, I think Gilbert Burns hits extremely hard. I didn't even really notice that until his last fight. Every time Gilbert threw a punch, I was like, wow, if that landed, it was going to result in a brutal knockout. And eventually it did. I do not think Dan is going to be safe anywhere on the feet. Dan does have a reach advantage, and he can probably stop any takedown attempts with the threat of a vicious knee landing. But I think I'm going to give Gilbert the edge on the feet because I think he hits extremely hard, and I think Dan's going to be trying not to catch a big shot. I know Dan just beat Mark DeCasey, and Mark is another hard hitter, but I think if Gilbert connects with a big shot on the feet, he's going to be able to put Dan out. And if it goes to the ground, I would definitely give him the grappling advantage and submission advantage. I mean, he's a submission specialist. So in this fight, my prediction is Gilbert Burns to finish it inside the distance, either by knockout or submission. For the first fight on the FS1 Prelims, we have Curtis Millender versus Max Griffin. Curtis is coming off of a great knockout victory over Thiago Alves in his UFC debut, and Max Griffin is coming off of the biggest win of his career over Mike Perry. I think this fight is going to come down to an extremely close decision. I think it's going to come down to who's more active. I mean, these guys are both knockout artists, but I don't see either one of them getting the knockout in this matchup. Curtis is a guy that is really good at setting up head kicks, and his movement's good. And Max is a guy that he's pretty durable, as we saw against Mike Perry, and he brings good game plans to the mix. But since I think this fight is going to stay on the feet for the most part, and I think Curtis Millender is going to have the faster striking, the more damaging striking, and the more accurate striking, I think that's going to be enough for him to win the fight on the judges' scorecards and eventually win a decision. So my prediction is Curtis Millender by close decision, and I think his win streak is going to stay alive. Next up, we have number 3 ranked Raphael Assuncao versus number 11 ranked Rob Font. I'd say this is a little bit of a mismatch, and I'm not discrediting Rob Font, but I think Raphael is on his way to a title shot. I mean, he's probably just one fight away from a title shot, and Rob is just breaking into the top 10 now, or at least trying to. Rob hits hard, and he has good hands, as we saw when he fought Thomas Almeida, but I do think his weaknesses play into Assuncao's strengths a little bit too much. When Rob fought Pedro Munoz, he got tagged, knocked down, and submitted all in the same fight, and I think Assuncao, if he gets this fight to the ground, he's either going to win by dominant decision or submission, but he has the potential to win by knockout as well. When he fought Matthew Lopez, he was winning a dominant decision and ended up winning by knockout due to a punch in the 3rd round. So Raphael, I just think, is a couple degrees better than Rob. I think Rob's only way to win this fight would be by knockout, but Raphael's fought so many hard hitters before and beat them. I mean, he has a victory over the current champ, TJ Dillashaw, and he recently beat Marlon Moraes. So I have to say my prediction, and this is probably my most confident prediction, is Raphael by either dominant decision or submission victory. So as I was recording this video, the news broke that Yancy Medeiros is out. Mike Perry is currently looking for an opponent. I'm pretty sure he still wants to fight. And the front runner now that they're saying is going to take the fight is Paul Felder. As many of you know, his fight with James Vick was also scrapped. So Paul Felder versus Mike Perry. I'm going to go ahead and give you my short little prediction for that. If that's not the fight that happens, I'm sorry. But yeah, the news just broke. Yancy Medeiros is 100% out of the fight. So Mike Perry versus Yancy, I was actually going to say Mike Perry would win that. But against Paul Felder, I mean, this isn't even like Paul's coming in on short notice. Paul's been training for a fight himself, and I think he is years ahead of Mike Perry technically. The guy hits hard, and he's good on the ground. So I'm sorry that I'm not going into complete analysis. I just wanted to update you guys on this, and I didn't want to make the Yancy prediction if that wasn't even the fight that was happening. So I got to say, if Paul Felder versus Mike Perry is the fight that ends up happening, I got to say Paul wins by decision and Mike Perry loses another fight, unfortunately. So yeah, my prediction, if that fight happens, is Paul Felder by dominant decision. To headline the FS1 Prelims, we have Uriah Hall versus Paulo Costa. Honestly, I think this could be just a one-round war. Uriah has really good striking, really good kicks. That's probably what he's known for, is his spinning back kicks. And Paulo is just a huge powerhouse. I mean, the dude looks like he's on every supplement in the book, legal and illegal. I'm not saying he's on steroids, but I mean, he certainly looks like it. Uriah was supposed to fight Vitor Belfort in his last fight, but he had some weight-cutting issues, and a lot of people question his dedication. And he just seems like an all-around pretty inconsistent guy. But when he puts his mind to it and he seems really dedicated, he usually wins by emphatic knockout. But Uriah definitely has a really tough fight on his hands for sure. I mean, Paulo just retired Johnny Hendricks. So this guy is no joke whatsoever. And Uriah has fought and beaten much better competition, such as Gegard Mousasi. But I think his inconsistency is going to be his downfall in this fight. I mean, he doesn't have the best chin. He's been knocked out and dropped multiple times. Even in fights that he ended up winning, he gets dropped. Especially in the Krzysztof Jotko fight, it looked like Uriah was about to get brutally knocked out, and then he came back in the next round and won by knockout. But against Paulo, I think he's just going to crumble under the pressure and eventually get knocked out. So in this fight, I got to say Paulo Costa, the eraser, by first round knockout. And now for the first fight on the main card, we have the highly anticipated return of Gokhan Saki. He's coming off of a knee injury versus Khalil Rountree Jr., another powerhouse. This prediction to me is pretty self-explanatory. With Khalil Rountree, you have a guy that hits hard, but unfortunately for him, that's about his only good quality. He gasses out extremely fast. In his last fight, he basically got worked because he gassed out the entire fight. He couldn't do anything. And Gokhan is a guy that he's a little bit older, and in his UFC debut, it looked like he had some cardio troubles as well, but definitely not as bad as Khalil's. And throughout the entire round, or as long as that fight lasted, Gokhan had true knockout power. And the guy's striking, technique-wise at least, is miles ahead of Khalil's. And I think Gokhan's going to be able to land bigger shots, stay in the fight longer. And Gokhan's dealt with guys that are way bigger and hit way harder than Khalil does. So this fight is going to be nothing new for him. I think this fight might be pretty close in the first round, but I think in the second round, especially if Khalil has a high output of strikes in the first, he's going to be really tired, and Gokhan's going to be able to finish the fight probably by a TKO. So I got to say Gokhan Saki by second round knockout or TKO. Next up, we have a fight that was already supposed to happen at UFC 223. This is one of the fights that got scrapped because of that whole dolly throwing business. So just to reiterate what I've already predicted before, basically I think Anthony Pettis is a shell of his former self and the game has moved past him. His coach is saying that this is a new Anthony Pettis and he's more dedicated than ever before, but I really don't think it's going to make a difference. In my opinion, Michael Chiesa is one of the best lightweights and he really could be ranked higher. I think there's some guys above him he could beat. So in this fight, I just see the same thing happening to Anthony that's been happening to him. He just breaks under pressure. He broke under Max Holloway's pressure. He broke under Dustin Poirier's pressure. And I know Mike isn't necessarily known as a pressure fighter, but I think once things start getting hard, if Anthony isn't finding success and things go to the ground, I do think Mike is going to be able to lock up a submission. I'd like to say that Anthony has better striking and better kicks and stuff, but I mean, at this point, I really don't know. I mean, the guy really is a shell of his former self. So I think it's going to be pretty even on the feet, but on the ground, I think Mike's going to have a huge advantage, and we'll probably see a finish here. I do think it'll be a good fight. I mean, this is fight of the night potential. Back when this fight was on UFC 223, Dana White said this was his pick for the fight of the night. And I mean, based on Mike's last performance, he didn't have the best showing either, but I definitely think he's in a lot better of a position than Anthony. So I got to say Michael Chiesa wins by submission. I think it'll be a good fight, but I'm saying Mike by submission. Next up, we got the big boys. Probably the two hardest hitters on the roster. We have Francis Ngannou versus Derrick Lewis. And speaking of Francis Ngannou, I recently made a promo for this man that I really would appreciate if you guys watched. Give me some feedback. I've been thinking about whether or not I should make promos for other fighters. Maybe you can give me some suggestions. So the link will be in the description. Honestly, this is probably the fight on the card that I'm the most excited for, just because I know something brutal and horrible is going to happen. I think this is a one-rounder for sure, just 1 or 2 rounds. I mean, if this fight goes the distance, in Derrick Lewis himself's words, they should both be cut. I think the Stipe fight against Francis made a lot of people forget just how terrifying Francis was, but I mean, the dude is still the record holder for the hardest human punch. He's still absolutely terrifying, and if you strike with him, there's a really high chance you're going to sleep. I'm kind of surprised Derrick Lewis even took this fight. I know they kind of had like some back and forth bickering, but I mean, Derrick is a guy that has been knocked out before and doesn't have the best chin. I mean, he got knocked out by Matt Mitrione's shoulder, and he has all these back issues. He gets magnesium injected in his back every week just to be able to train and fight. And I mean, Francis is like some physical specimen that was made in a lab somewhere, but props to Derrick Lewis for taking the fight. I'm just going to ask you guys to take a minute and pray to the MMA gods that this fight actually happens. I know Derrick Lewis's back has flared up in the past and he's not been able to fight, so just take a second and pray that this violent masterpiece gets to take place. But anyway, in terms of the actual matchup with these guys, I think Francis has almost every advantage. He's bigger, stronger, hits harder. I think he has a better chin. And to be honest with you, I think their gas tanks aren't that different. Derrick has gassed out many times before. And I know Francis gassed out extremely bad against Stipe, but he still went 5 rounds with the champ, which many people cannot say. And Francis took a lot of hard hits from Stipe and was not even phased at all. I think Derrick does hit a lot harder than Stipe does, but he's also sloppier in technique. I think if Francis connects like 1 or 2 times, it's going to all be over for Derrick. I think within the first like 4 or 5 exchanges, somebody's going to get knocked out. So in this one, since I think Francis has all the advantages, hits harder, better striking, more durable, I got to say Francis Ngannou wins this fight by first round knockout. For the first championship fight on the card, we have Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega. There is a lot of hype behind this fight, and a lot of people think that Brian is going to be the one to finally dethrone Max Holloway. Yeah, this is a pretty hard prediction in my opinion. We got guys that have very, very different strengths. Max Holloway is way better on the feet. He has really good striking, has that 1-2 combo pretty much on lock, can hit it on anybody. While Brian Ortega, he's decent on the feet, but has amazing ground game. That's pretty much his true strong point. Honestly, I think Brian Ortega can finish anyone if it goes to the ground. But I just don't know if he's going to be able to take Max down. Max has a really high takedown defense percentage. And I'm pretty sure that Max is going to try his hardest to stay on the feet no matter what. Obviously, from watching Brian's past fights. Yes, Brian did knock out Frankie with an elbow and then a perfectly placed uppercut. But Max and Frankie are two completely different fighters. Frankie honestly could be a bantamweight, and Max is a huge featherweight who could easily be a lightweight. So I don't necessarily know if Brian's going to be able to have that same striking dominance. It was a very surprising win, and it definitely means that Brian has power and good accuracy, but I don't really think it means that he's going to knock Max out or anything. I definitely don't think that. I think what it means is that Brian is going to be able to stay even enough on the feet where it's not going to be a complete blowout, where it's not going to be one-sided for Max, and he's going to be trying his hardest to get the fight to the ground. I think if this fight goes all 5 rounds and Max has been able to keep the fight on the feet, maybe stuffed a couple takedowns, and pretty much have his way with the striking, I think he will win. But I think if there's any finish in this fight, it's going to be Brian Ortega by submission. I mean, the dude can lock up submissions from the clinch. He can take you down from the clinch. He doesn't have to just shoot for takedowns. I highly doubt Max would shoot for a takedown, so I'm not even going to say that. But that goes without saying. If Max shoots for a takedown, he's probably going to get submitted by Brian. But since Brian has shown such an ability to stay in fights, most of his submissions have come in the 3rd round. I definitely think he's going to be able to go the distance. And I think it's going to be pretty hard for Max Holloway to stay on the feet for 25 straight minutes against a guy like Brian. I'm sure this is going to be predicting a big upset here, but honestly, my prediction is Brian Ortega by 3rd round submission. I do think he's going to be able to get it to the ground and lock it up. He knows what he has to do. And I think this fight is going to be more of Max Holloway trying to stop Brian Ortega's game plan than it is Max Holloway trying to enforce his own game plan. And that's never a good thing. So my prediction is Brian Ortega by 3rd round submission. And finally, we have heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic versus light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier. Daniel is looking to become the next champ and to solidify his legacy. This might be one of his last fights. He said he was going to retire around the age of 40. So he's definitely looking to make history here. And the UFC is obviously eating this up because if DC wins and they can do the Jon Jones trilogy at heavyweight, they already know that would do amazing pay-per-view buys and really help the UFC out. And if Stipe wins, then they could do Stipe versus Jon Jones at heavyweight to see who's the true GOAT. I think that would do a ton of pay-per-views as well. So the UFC's really in a good place with this fight. At first, I really wasn't on board with it because I didn't really think it accomplished anything for either guy. But at this point, I'm okay with it. With this matchup, I think the only advantage that DC has over Stipe is his wrestling. DC is an Olympic-level wrestler, and we've seen he can take down anybody. So I think he will have the wrestling advantage, but I don't think it's going to be as big of a gap as many people think. Stipe was a college wrestler and has, I'm not saying that's close to an Olympic level wrestler, but the dude has high level wrestling as well. Not to mention he's a lot bigger, he's taller, has a longer reach, and he's going to weigh more, or at least I think he's going to weigh more. So in my opinion with this one, I think DC made a mistake by wanting to move up for this fight because I do not think he's going to beat Stipe. I think Daniel's wrestling advantage is not going to be enough to win him the fight. Stipe has a lot better striking. He's bigger, has a lot more power. I really think we could see Stipe stop Daniel in this fight, maybe like third or fourth round. In his last couple fights, Stipe really has been showing that he is the greatest heavyweight of all time. And I don't think with this fight anything's going to be different. I mean, in DC's last performance against Volkan, he had a great showing, but he was going against a guy that was extremely one-dimensional and basically had no takedown defense and no ground game. Stipe is way more well-rounded and bigger and stronger than Volkan, so I think DC's going to have a different animal on his hands here. So like I said, I think DC's only strong point is going to be like trying to take Stipe down and hold him there, but I do not think he's going to be able to hold Stipe down. I think we're eventually going to see a stoppage, and I think Stipe is going to get the TKO or KO victory, so for this prediction, I have Stipe winning by probably third or fourth round KO.